Stranger Than Fiction, I have at number 5.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't expect for this to actually be as high as it was. And quite frankly, I guess I didn't want it to be, maybe subconsciously, because this is their major label debut. This is when they were on Atlantic. Although technically it is also released, it was co-released by Epitaph. So Epitaph got to release it for like in certain markets or something like that.
Okay, that's cool.
It was almost like a distribution. It was like a transition period because Bad Religion going to Atlantic is like one of the most consequential a punk band going to a major label ever. There just wasn't a lot of fallout for Bad Religion. It changed like almost everything about punk music and everything on the underground. But for Bad Religion, they just sort of had a ho hum time at the majors, and then came back. So
it's because they kept recording the same albums. They didn't do like some like it wasn't like they went and started doing disco or grunge. Like they just
they didn't. They literally didn't. That's in my notes there. They literally didn't sell out, and it kind of hurt them in a way on the major. It did because they lost their cool factor for not being like in punk anymore. But they weren't like young. They were like literally as old as you and I are now, almost. You know what I mean? Like they weren't like young and hip and in the know either. So it was kind of a downtime. But this album, though, even though the first one that's technically not produced by Brett, although he performs on it quite a bit, still very much in the spirit of an Epitaph early 90s Bad Religion album, even though it's technically not that.
What year did it come out in?
94. The old
94. I think this is the one that I was like, I feel like I know some of the songs on this. I think this is the one I was looking at, and I probably did have this record at some point.
Well, this would have been, if you would have got All Ages might have come out like in 95, I want to say, but it was the wrap up of the Epitaph years, basically. It's basically all the good Bad Religion, or all the hits of Bad Religion, if you will, before this period is what All Ages essentially is.
Yeah, and I think this one was available at places I was shopping as like a young person, like at Best Buys, Target maybe. And so I probably got it at that point because it was a punk album that was accessible.
Mm-hmm. And I honestly think the other stuff that you and I like actually hurt this album a lot, because I just said 1994. Well, you know, Green Day and The Offspring and Rancid are those things. They are hip and young and good. They were all those things, all inspired, and many of them launched specifically by Rancid. No Effects, Punk and Drublick.
Yeah.
Bad Religion got really old really quick in the 90s. Like all of a sudden, like, holy crap.
That's true.
They weren't that old. Like chronologically, they're like 2 years older than all those bands I just mentioned. But in everyone's brain, they're like ancient compared to those bands because they're literally peers of like Black Flag. So they go all the way back there. And that's
crazy. I never really thought about it like that, but you're absolutely correct. Do you have any songs that stick out? Like a couple, 2 or 3 you like a lot?
Let me go on a few of them. And I have mostly the popular ones on this one. And that's the one thing. They tended to tease out the right songs for their hits. So you have the re-recording of 21st Century Digital Boy, which I think is a little bit better on this album, just slightly. And of course, the big ones, Stranger Than Fiction and Infected, which we've all heard a million times. But you also have Television featuring our boy, Tim Armstrong.
That's a great song.
Who's on this one. The Handshake and Better Off Dead. I love all of those as just like top level songs.
The first handful that you said, like the hits out of there, I recognize those names. Television, I recognize because it's got Tim on it. The other ones I don't recognize, but now that I'm thinking about it, this might have made my list too. If I was going to do a separate top 5 on my own. This album is actually really good now that I'm remembering. This is what's going to take some time. So I want to start talking about this stuff with you to remember things, because I do remember having this record now, mainly because of Television. When you said it had Tim on it, I was like, oh yeah, I did have this record, because I would seek out anything that had that guy on it. Especially back then, I was uber dork like for Rancid. So anything that he was associated with, I was owning it.
Yeah, and it's funny because the cover of this album, and this is a thing that I've come to at Bad Religion. So Bad Religion, of all the punk bands, because they're actually let me reset this. So Bad Religion, they're like the Michael Jordan of punk rock, and let me explain this. This is my hot take. I came up this morning as I was taking a shower. No lie.
Okay.
Michael Jordan is a product of the 80s, right? He's an 80s guy. Most of his prime was actually in the 80s. He's peers with people in the 80s. He's an 80s guy. However, he won championships in the 90s. So similar, Bad Religion is a product of the 80s. They are in 80s punk rock. They are a product of that. but they won their titles in the 90s. In the early 90s
Okay.
is when they ended up owning. Now, I said all of that to say that that's actually because it was their era of signing to a major. That is kind of their era of, I think, when they sort of tried to produce pop music. And they are, even not necessarily consciously, subconsciously, they are the most 90s of all these bands we talk about, even though they were older and go back to the 80s, but maybe that's why. Because everyone else is just finding their way. They're already secure in their 90s. If you look at this, look at that album cover. That's a 90s album cover. It's black and white. It's and actually they had several black and white album covers, and not black and white like a Rancid way. It's like a photograph.
No,
it looks
it's like a
90s.
black and white photograph, not high contrast black and white imagery.
Yes, it's something that could be like a Counting Crows album or something, right?
I was just thinking it looks like a grunge record. It looks like a Pearl Jam album.
The song Infected, they said specifically because they were going to a major label, they already had the song. They wanted to make it a little grungy, which you can kind of hear that on there. Like, so they did sell out a little, and I wouldn't say sell out, they were just sort of kind of just in their time.
Adapting.
In the same way that I might wear a hat that's fashionable now. It doesn't mean I'm selling out to the hat. It's just what was in now. And if you look at all that 90s stuff, that's the other thing about it. It's not as cool as the other punk rock. It's not as attractive. And it's not like as 90s as the stuff it was actually on a major label now competing against. Like you compare that to like Bush, and yeah, I'll take Bad Religion over Bush any day, but you understand why the public bought Bush instead of Bad Religion in this time period.
I don't, but I see your point.
You see what I'm saying though? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna buy Bush over Bad Religion, but like I was trying to think of like a perfect 90s and only 90s band, and like the Bush, like that's
Nirvana.
Yeah, but Nirvana's so legendary though too that they almost go out of that. Whereas I'm thinking about like bands that were just pretty good, big, kind of on the stratosphere that these guys would have been on.
I get a mountain of crap every time I say that Nirvana is not a punk band.
Mm.
Oh man, I just wanted to say it one more time on here. I'm learning from you, sir.
A direct line though,
between
Bad Religion and Nirvana. Like I think.
Oh, dude, I honestly don't even really care. I just do it for the lulz.
Because, like, let's face it, none of the pop punk exists without Suffer, and we'll talk about that later. But like, guitar music does get really popular in the mainstream, mostly because of Nevermind, and thus you already have a ready-made scene here that Bad Religion has created, and they're the first band actually that's signed. They're signed before a lot of these other bands are actually signed. That's why their major label album comes out in '94. They're not like the Offspring who are big or the Rancid who are big and then are hunted after. They've already left the train, which the story of Epitaph, it's even more crucial that Rancid and NoFX stick around because look at that. Epitaph, not only did they lose the Offspring, they lost their in-house band. They lost Bad Religion in that same exact time period.
That is pretty wild. Yeah, I was watching a video. I don't remember what I was doing. Oh, I was editing a clip of, I don't know if you saw the last two like little clips that I dropped. They're like 4 minutes a piece. You should watch them. I'm working really hard on these things. I'm learning my editing. But I was watching some video to get clips to put in that, like just to have imagery in the background and like moving parts. And I saw this like thing with when you mentioned Rancid talking to Matt Pinfield. And so I went back and found that. And first off, it's funny to hear them talk as young men. And their voices just sound so much different. Little.
Yeah,
I know.
So little.
But Tim's like, his feet just won't stop moving and kicking around. I'm like, this dude's socially awkward so bad.
It has no bones in his body. He's just kind of
right. But I like the way they said it. They're like, Lars was like, well, there's nothing really wrong with being on a major label. That's just not what we were trying to do right now. And Tim was like, yeah, it's just like all my friends were over here. He's like, I just didn't want to not be around my friends. And I was like, that's an answer I would have given, dude. Like, oh, all my buddies are over here, so I'm gonna take a little less, but enjoy my time over here better. Like, because there's a lot to be said for that. Money is not end all be all for me. So I would much rather enjoy my time than be paid to be miserable. So, anyways, I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, and it filled that specifically what you're talking about filled the gap that was left by Bad Religion in a lot of ways. Right. Rancid filled that gap, I think. I think so a lot, especially for Epitaph, and I think that. You take Rancid as like the foundation, and then you have stuff like Pennywise and I don't know. There's a number of bands on Epitaph back then. I think the Descendants were on Epitaph, but all that stuff was like what was set on top of the foundation that Rancid, or like it's like Offspring laid the foundation. Rancid was the one that was continuing to hold it there. Offspring funded. I would say Offspring funded
the foundation. Rancid was the foundation. The rest of the bands were what was laid on top. Yeah. Bro,
in a universe created by Bad Religion.
Facts.